Great. Thanks for joining us. So today our conversation is probably going to take around 50 minutes to an hour. As Zara said, please feel free to ask any patai, any questions along the way, and we can keep it conversational. I suppose to give you a bit of context, with the Govett-Brewster Gallery, Lenlai Centre based in New Plymouth, we owe the significance of the Govett-Brewster collection to Monica Brewster, who was determined that the gallery would be ambitious in its support of contemporary art and artists. And it's a collection that was started in 1970 and has been added to over the last sort of 5 decades through various directors and curators. And it includes seminal and challenging works that contribute to the story of New Zealand art. The works in the collection have an expansive view. They both contribute or are thinking about being grounded in place, but also about our place in the wider Pacific. And at the moment, or as part of that kaupapa, the Govett-Brewster focuses on supporting artists to make new work, so commissioning new work for exhibition, contemporary art for our time. And so our discussion today is about creating significant works and contemporary art of our time, and in particular looking at recent commissions at the Govett-Brewster and exhibitions. So to start with, we've got some little presentations from our speakers, but perhaps first it'd be great if you could introduce yourselves in the way that you see fit.
Kia ora koutou, mihi atu kia koutou. My name is Megan Tamati-Quennell. I'm the Curator of Modern and Contemporary Māori and Indigenous Art, but in the project that I'll speak about is I was really employed at that time at the Govett-Brewster as the, I think it was Indigenous Curator Contemporary Art, and the project with Shona. I'm speaking actually on Shona's behalf. She's not a person who likes to speak publicly. She asked if I would speak for her, which I will, around the project that we did. So I was employed at the Brewster at that point when, with the genesis of that project that came about. There were 2 works in that project, one called Ko Te Kihi, and then the other one was Ko Te Kihi Taku Ingoa. But I'll just hand over to Mr. Graham over here.
Kia ora. Kei te hawhatarangi pupui te hau. He ke tua, he pohu haere mai he tanewha. Kia ora rā koutou ngā tanewha wainganui a tātou. E rere atu taku mihi, wherei toku awa waikato tanewha rau. Waikato horopona mu kia koutou katoa, ko Brett Graham tōku ingoa. I said it's raining mighty hard today. There's a storm outside, so it's a sign that the tanewha are among you and building this storm. So thank you for coming to hear this.
I hope people can hear us. So I'm going to pass over to...
Do you want to start some slides?
Yeah, I think we'll start with you, Megan, actually. I'm going to skip to... Here we go.
Okay. So the 2 works, Ko Te Kihi and Ko Te Kihi Taku Ingoa, are 2 kind of major sculptures by senior Māori artist Shona Rapira Davies. They were works that were completed last year and earlier this year. They're both kind of standalone installations. One goes up the Lenlai hallway. Can you hear? Okay. Is that better? Okay. Yeah, so she's a very senior Māori woman artist, has been practising probably since about the 80s, studied in Dunedin at Otago Polytech, went down there, and she is a sculptor. And they were very ambitious projects. So there were really 2 works. They came about, the genesis of that project with Shona came about, I was doing a show called Swallowing Geography, which really looked at, I worked with 4 artists for that project, and it was like responsive to that landscape, that particular landscape in Taranaki. It was my first kind of major show at the Govett-Brewster. I had done one previous to that, which was Dee Harding's, who is a Indigenous Australian artist. I kind of picked that up from the past directors and did that show. But this was kind of my show to kind of say I am here, and wanted to kind of acknowledge Ngāti Tūwharetoa, the people of that place, in Ngā Motu particularly, and also talk about that landscape and what it was and what it means to people. So I commissioned 4 artists just as a normal project. It was originally going to be Matt Penne and Kate Newby, and really it was in conversation with those two in terms of the exhibition. Kate almost said no to me when I almost cried because I really wanted her in the show. And I thought about including Shona and Ana Iti, and I kind of bounced off a project that Tina Barton had done at the Āti Awa Art Gallery with some younger Māori women artists, and Ana Iti had made a work that referenced Shona Rapira Davies', well, it's called Te Aro Park, but it's actually called, her title is Te Wai Mapahi, which is the work that's in central Wellington. And I thought I'd put those two together. So I invited them to come up and have a look at spaces. Well, Shona kind of dumped Ana in a way and ran off and decided and pitched me 2 projects which were more than the budget I had for the exhibition, in 2 kind of separate spaces. Ana got a space of her own to do a work, and Shona kind of took off. But I really loved the kind of ambition. I mean, she was 69 then, nearly 70, and I felt like, you know, why wouldn't I try and support her to make these 2 works? So I didn't have a big budget. I went for one. I went for the most, this work here, Ko Te Kihi Taku Ingoa. I went for that work first. I also knew the genesis of that work. So I went for that work first because it was the most ambitious. It was the most expensive. I could give her half the money. We went to Creative New Zealand for the other half, but we didn't get the money. So in the end, for swallowing geography, we had to revert back to the first work, and the second work came about really because of Zara, actually, and working really hard to gain funding to make that happen. I'll stop there and pass over to Brett.
Actually, can I ask you a question?
Ask me a question, yes.
Can you just explain a bit about the story behind this work by Shona?
So, Ko Te Kihi Taku Ingoa, she really made a work. This work is really about the idea of sacrifice. And she kind of did a very classic Māori thing where she linked her kind of whakapapa to do with Ngāti Wai. She's from Great Barrier Island, ki Aotea, with Taranaki. She at one stage made me drive her down to the Ngā Motu beach, and she completely freaked out because she said she could hear whales in that beach, and that she said that she could hear them, but the water was really dirty. And if you go down where the harbour is, where Paritutu is, it's actually quite diabolical down there. So being a person from water, she actually said she could hear whales, and she told me stories about how whales used to arrive there, and then they couldn't anymore because of all the kind of the oil industry and extraction. They used to go there to give birth. Anyway, she wove the story, Ngāti Wai story, which is to do with, the whale and the kauri tree. It's not my story, it's hers, but the idea of the whale and the kauri being brothers, and at one stage the whale walking on land, and how he gave up his skin and his body for his brother. And so that idea of sacrifice, and that was the link for her into Pariaka. She was wanting to talk about what happened at Pariaka and the sacrifice of both those people of Pariaka, which I am one, and the children particularly, and that idea of manaki and all of those things she was talking about, which is the intersection for me with Brett's work.
Kia ora tātou. If you're a really famous artist, you get other people to speak for you, but if you're not, you have to speak for yourself. So the exhibition was Tai Moana Tai Tangata, and I did a residency at the Govett-Brewster in 2018 and wanted to make all the connections between Taranaki and my tribe of Waikato. So on one level, it was the idea of ngā kiwai o te kete, the idea that
or the saying of Tāwhiaos, that Waikato had one handle of the kit and Taranaki another. But Waikato and Taranaki had most land confiscated, so there are a lot of things that we had in common. But also, there are a lot of connections with my family as well, which I could explore because one of my ancestors was sent down to Parehaka as one of the 12 by King Tāwhiao. So it was important for me to do this work and make those connections to Taranaki. The title Tai Moana Tai Tangata comes from an expression ka pare te Tai Moana, ka tumu te Tai Tangata, which were words by famous chiefs, Pōtatau and Te Rauparaha, which mean when the tide of ocean rises, the tide of humanity recedes. And even though they were spoken in a very different context, to me it had real relevance to today and our situation with global warming. So it was very important to look at those things in the past, and then make them relevant to today, and go beyond just that history between our two tribes and talk about bigger issues. So can you put it back to the... So works like this, very conscious of the space there. It was called Cease Tide of Wrongdoing. And the title is English because I'm not from Taranaki. I didn't feel I had the right to use Taiporo Henui, which in the Taranaki settlement is described as Cease Tide of Wrongdoing. And this work sets the tone. It's based on a new pole. So new poles were the focal point of what they call the Pai Marere religion, or it's also known as Ho-Ho. And these things hadn't been seen in Taranaki for 150 years, so as Ruakere Hond acknowledged. So I'm very interested in reviving things from the past, especially when I deem they have relevance to today. Is that it? And then there were videos as well, so there were 4 large sculptures and videos that connected those stories, and the notion of prophecy as well. Taranaki is known for Te Whiti and Tohu, but also someone called Te Ua Haumene, who created this religion called Pai Marere, and he had a vision on the coastline at a place called Te Namu. And because of the idea of prophecy, it gave me license to get carried away, if you like. So I exaggerated what's happening in Taranaki, and in the image of the coastline, there's animations of oil rigs, oil derricks, and oil flares. So to talk about the lust for resources and how that lust for resources ultimately leads to this dilemma that we're in now with climate change. Thank you.
You want to talk about
And other works refer specifically to Waikato. This, for example, is a turret that's based on 2 turrets that are very close to where I live. One at Mercer and the other at Ngārua Wahia, which were gun turrets left by a ship called Pioneer, which went up the Waikato River and blasted past sites like Rangiriri. So what I've done here is I've alluded to that shape, but also other government policies of eradicating Māori, such as assimilation. So colloquially, people call it a wedding cake, and it refers to statements by people like Ranginui Walker that said that all the race relations problems would be solved in the bedroom of the country. So statements like that. Yeah. And then other works that refer to the leadership of Te Whiti and Tohu, such as Maunga Rongo ki te whenua, Maunga Rongo ki te tangata, which combine a pātika and a wagon in reference to strategies that Te Whiti had and Tohu had of feeding their manuwhiri, feeding the surveyors and the soldiers as they entered their territory, as a way of proclaiming that they were tangata whenua, feeding their manuhiri. Yeah.
And it's such an extraordinary work, and I love this on the end because it comes off a new pole, right, at Te Papa. They're kind of like, for me, like, what do you call them, pūkaya, or I thought they were extraordinary. And the Motunui panels that you put all over that, and Motunui panels being very kind of ancient panels that were buried at one stage in the Waikiripuru swamp, and then were found by a farmer and then went offshore. Someone bought them and traded them. But with Brett's work, they're like everywhere. They're like on the sides, on the roof. It was like quite an unnerving thing to see. I really liked how he shifted all of that. They're on the front, they're on the sides, they're on the roof, they're on the back, and like no pātaka you'd ever seen probably. But I thought that was extraordinary. Kinda.
You related to Lionel Grant? This is the same thing.
There's one more work. Oh, no. That's all right. So, extraordinary work, and Moana Tai Tangata is actually currently on show at Christchurch Art Gallery. You might have also seen it at City Art Gallery. What was that last year? And it's still available as well as a virtual exhibition on our website. But I'm quite keen for you guys to sort of talk through the interconnections between Tai Moana and Tai Tangata and ko te kihi taku ingoa. There seems to be many overlapping strands. Obviously, they both are a body of work and works that are rooted in history and concerned about the future. So maybe I'll start with you, Megan, if you could talk about the connections that you see.
So the ko te kihi, can you pull those images up? They would, whatever you want to do, whatever's easiest. Shona gave me videos to show rather than photographs. Anyway, maybe the video of the ko te kihi one, not that one, the other one. Again, they have her work, it's a beautiful drawing of the ko te kihi taku, this one. Yeah, they're like palisades. They were all down a hallway. They really did have a specific focus on the land wars in Taranaki. She wanted to respond and acknowledge the people of Waiuku particularly, again, my family, which I thought was good, and the armed conflict over land ownership and really about sovereignty that took place between kind of the iwi and the New Zealand government. So that was March 1860 to March 1861. And it's a commentary really about, that's the other work, doesn't matter. It was really a commentary about settling the country and through a kind of a very aggressive colonial process. And she also, in that ko te kihi work, the first work, she talks about the change of landscape in Taranaki, from the shift from kind of native trees through to, and bush through to pastoral land. So all those little bubbles, she had little tin soldiers in there. She even had one that she pulled out, which was von Tempsky. She found all those, and then she got some other people to make some for her. And the graphite on the back wall, I also thought about that aesthetically in terms of yours. You have graphite on some of your work. And those trees which she got off the barrier, she took those trees from the barrier, they're kānuka and mānuka. And then she reworked them. They are like palisades. As much as they're about bush, they're also like about palisades and therefore paths, therefore fortifications. The second work, Ko Te Kihi Taku Ingoa, as I said, is a northern iwi narrative where the whale gives up his life and his body and his skin for his brother, the Kauri tree. And so it's really used as a metaphor in that work. And again, it paid homage to Pariaka as a papakainga that was made in response. You know, that it was one of the first pan-tribal kind of places. It was made in response to the land wars, you know, and based on a prophecy of peace, which was kind of extraordinary. I think for me too, I don't know if you've asked this question, but I thought I might answer it. For me, both of these works, Brett's works, and even though they're very locally kind of focused, I mean, Pariaka's a place that's so important, both locally, nationally, internationally, it's like, you know, we're talking about peaceful protest or non-violent social activism, you know, 100 years before Gandhi thought about it, before Martin Luther King. So as a site and as a place and as a response to like aggression, it's kind of an amazing story. So, you know, I understood why Shona wanted to respond to that.
Well, it's natural. I think it's natural for Māori to make connections when you're in other parts of the country. You have to do that. So Parihaka attracted people from all over the country, including the north. So Selwyn Muru used to talk about how there was a large population from Tai Tokoro that went down and supported that. So it's natural that Shona would make those connections. And Waikato also, as I say, Tāwhao sent the 12, the Takau Marua, down to support Parihaka. We talk about strategies of peace, but I'm also intrigued by Te Tokowaru, who was the warrior. And, you know, Māori often fantasise, what if we'd had a bigger army, or what if we'd had more guns and we'd kept the country? And, oh, is that too radical? Anyway. I'm never going to sell any works today. So I'm also intrigued by Te Tokowaru and the fact that he almost defeated the British before he ended up retreating. But then he became an avid follower of Te Whiti and Tohu as well at Parihaka. So like that wagon, Maungarongo, was a homage to him as well. And that's part of the ambiguity of the Paimariri and the Ho-Ho movement, was you have the two hands, you have Ruru and Rika, you have the different gods, ways of settling things was either through peace or war. And so they were two sides that Tuaho Mene was aware of. So as I say, it's natural to make those connections. What I love, for example, is the shows in Christchurch now, and of course there's a whole history there that not many people know about in Christchurch, and that's that after Bryce invaded Parihaka, after that the people continued to plough the land, they continued to pull up the fences, and then those prisoners, the initial prisoners, might have been sent to the Chathams, but then others were sent to Hokitika, Christchurch and Dunedin. And so there's a whole history there that connects that story. So, you know, that's what we do, is try to make all of those connections.
And then how has the show changed now that has it changed in Christchurch?
There's an image, actually, if you go through mine. Yeah. The most important thing was to make the transformations and make all those connections when it was in New Plymouth anyway. And so I was, you know, humbled by the way Taranaki embraced the work, and it created a whole series of talks. People like Ruakere Hond embarked on a whole series of talks that talked about the relationship, even the church. So there's the church there called St. Mary's, and even though it's a church, it has the hatchments of all the British regiments that fought against Taranaki. So even though it's a place of peace, it's very much a place of war for Māori that go there and see these flags. So like this image refers to the hatchments, where I have all the numbers of the British regiments there, and people are able to walk on them. So there were those connections. So it evoked all these other conversations with the church about, you know, how to reconcile those differences within the community, how to heal those wounds within the community, which were very important.
And there was an amazing talk from Namata Skipper about the poi that's, you know, key to Parihaka. There's a poi that there's poi that's really important culturally, and she talked about what those poi speak of. And I think, I don't know, outside of, you know, marae or whatever, or outside, whether those kinds of conversations have happened in galleries before. So Brett's show really, I suppose, enabled people to talk about things that were really significant, and talked about a poi that they had created. She talked about her tūpuna, where she, being taken off as an 8-year-old with all the nannies to go and learn how to do poi. They carry the history and based on the beat of the soldiers walking into or coming to Sack Pariaka, all of those kinds of things. But I don't know if they'd had that opportunity within a gallery context anyway, art gallery context, to have those conversations before or see their significance. So I think the community definitely embraced that project.
I was at the Black Ferns game in the weekend, and 42,000 people embraced the poi. This work was a new work I made for Christchurch. It's a little bit delicate. It's called The Great Replacement. And the Great Replacement is a white supremacist theory that the Anglo-Saxon nations are being replaced by immigrants. And of course, the irony of that conversation is, of course, my Pākehā ancestors subdued my Māori relatives, in the process of colonising this land. So this was the work which, it's sort of like the other redoubts. So there's a whole strategy of building redoubts when you're claiming territories. And we grew up with these redoubts, in Taranaki and even in South Auckland where I grew up. So just up the road from us was Redoubt Road, and I had no idea that that's because there was a redoubt there. But there was a whole line of redoubts, of course, as the settlers encroached on more and more territory within Waikato or into Waikato, ultimately leading to Mangatawhiri stream, which Tāwhiao declared, if you cross this, there'll be warfare. But the redoubts were very much based on the idea of inclusion-exclusion, who's looking out at the land and who's looking at these structures. And ultimately at people like Thomas Russell, which I found fascinating, these speculators he was a politician, and then he advocated for war, and then he was made one of the major benefactors of the war. And yet he established institutions like the BNZ Bank and like New Zealand Insurance that are household names today. But of course, these institutions, or like the BNZ Bank, would not loan Māori money to build houses at one stage. So, the idea of who's actually included and who's excluded in these conversations.
Great, thanks, Brett. There's I think in terms of talking about works of significance, then many layers of narrative that are within these works is for me what makes them, significant. But I'm curious, from your respective positions as an artist, Brett, what qualifies for you in terms of make something being significant, and Megan, as well as a curator, what makes a work significant?
Me first? Oh, that's quite a hard question. I don't know. I think, the work of Shona's, for example, that Kotikihi Taku Ingoa, the genesis of that work started 25 years ago, and I think it's a very resolved work from her, in that she was supposed to make a work for Te Arahine for the opening of Te Papa, which was the female entrance to the marae. Again, there were kind of funding difficulties. The money went into the building and into the exhibitions. The commissions were kind of thought about later. And there were two, this was under Cliff Whiting and Cheryl Sutherland, there were two works that were supported for Te Arahine, which was the entrance, as I said, the female entrance to the marae. One was Jacqueline Fraser's and the second was Shona's. Jacqueline's went ahead. It was a beautiful work too called Te Arahine, named after the space, and the line of women. Went forward because the Friends of Te Papa bought it for the collection, and it was the first piece of contemporary Māori work that ever bought, I think. And so we were thrilled, and she got paid. Shona was asked, like other artists who were also in a similar circumstance, because there was problems, to kind of take on the financial kind of onus of making the work, and that we would acquire it at the end. And at that time she was a single parent with 2 children, and she basically said, I can't do that, so withdrew it. So it was interesting for me to see when she had the 2 works, the Te Ara Hene work and this Kohikihiki Taku Ingoa, although this has changed a little, or quite a lot really, they were down the same path. So the origin of it, or the genesis of it, had started 25 years earlier, and she'd carried it around in her head. And so to see her realise it, I knew it would be a significant work because she'd been thinking about it for so long and carrying it for so long. So I knew it meant something, and so therefore for me, I don't know if I can answer particularly what a work of significance is, but that's kind of how I look at things.
I know a work is significant if my father likes it. But he hasn't liked a work of mine since 1987. So what makes the work significant? Well, if it has resonance with the people, I think. The trouble is that can take a hell of a long time. Can take a long time, but I mean that's, we can't say if something's significant or not. Only other people can, or Megan, because she's at Te Papa.
Yeah, but it might not even happen in your lifetime actually. But I think sometimes it's a gut reaction to something. Again, I looked at Brett's show at the Govett-Brewster, and it was I felt like a seminal kind of moment, that show, that said a whole lot of things, that talked about that history in a way that perhaps it hadn't been talked about, particularly in art terms. As I said, with the Motunui panels all over that wagon, on the roof, on the back, on the front, which kind of frightened me in some ways. But I felt like, I think sometimes you see something like Ralph's Kuaka Godwit mural, and such based on a waiatatangi from his father to him, but this very modernist kind of work. I feel like they do have a resonance with people, and I think work speaks to people. So, and maybe sometimes it speaks to a moment, and I don't think it's not just about shaping the future. Perhaps it's about responding to the time. So maybe it hits something at that moment, but it's not a...
I just want to ask you a quick question. I was just wondering about Shona's work. Has a significant price been paid for it to go into a significant collection?
I'm working on it. Definitely working on it. And as I said, without the foundation people supporting the realisation of that project, it wouldn't have happened, and without Zara's kind of support and brokering all of that, it really wouldn't have happened. I do want to acquire it for Te Papa. I want to put it in Te Ara Hene, because for me then it goes full circle. It started in that moment. I can kind of honour her in that way and her practice. I think we have probably the most I think that work is as important as Ngā Morihu. And we didn't know Ngā Morihu was really important until after it was made, of course, and it has a particular resonance. I think this work is as strong as that. We do hold quite a few works of Shona's, and so to hold the kind of the major body of her work, I feel like it's important for it to go there. So it's not just about that, but it was also, we could put it in a space. It can be shown in other places. It does talk to do with the natural world as much as it talks about this world, So, yes, I'm working on it.
That was a good question, because Megan, at Te Papa you are in charge of the biggest collection of contemporary Māori art in the country. And I suppose that really talks to, your approach in terms of building the collection. But is there anything else that sort of informs what you, look to acquire, in building that collection?
I suppose I have been building it for 30 years, probably from the ground up. There were people who broke the ground way before me, people like Tim Walker, who really bought some really significant works. He bought Ngā Morihu. Shona was going to smash it up. She didn't like her own work. She often wants to smash it after she's made it. she was going to smash it. I think he bought it for $35,000, not a lot of money, but it was to save it from her smashing it and getting rid of it. And so he acquired it for the collection. He bought works of Emily Karakas. He bought, Ralph Hortidy's Black Phoenix. I can see Brett's work with Black Phoenix, in terms of a resonance, So I think you try and just do justice to people and represent them fully and properly. Make sure sometimes you have to go backwards and buy work that hadn't been bought. I do a whole project supposedly around Māori modernism, but looking at those artists like Fred who were working in the 50s, 60s through to the mid-70s who really didn't get, their work's not in the collection. Rouse was the person supported. I think there's an early work of Selwyn's from like 1964, but there was a whole lot of people. The women aren't in there. They're still not in there. Marilyn Webb was, but not in a good way. So you look at what's there and you think about how you build that and what you might do. It's also great to have conversations with artists around how they feel they want to be represented in a collection. I've had opportunities where I wanted to buy, this is an Indigenous Australian artist, Tracy Moffat, where I wanted to buy some of her Up in the Sky works, and she wanted me to buy the full suite. And I said, well, it's just down to money. And she said to me, well, you buy half and I'll gift you half, and it's probably, it's a $100,000 gift from an artist. But that is how she wanted to be represented in the collection. So she really pushed. And, I was absolutely thrilled to be able to do that one for her. And I don't think that Up in the Sky, which kind of launched her career through the Deer Centre of the Arts in New York, I don't think they were in any other collection in New Zealand. So, you really work 2 and 4 people like this in terms of their work. That's how I see it.
And Brett, I'm thinking about the Motunui panels that were, taken, heisted overseas and then brought back, and their inclusion in your work, and then perhaps also what Megan was just talking about in terms of considerations of building a collection. I'm quite curious as an artist whether you have any particular ethics or concerns around the collection of your own work, what collections they might go into, or...
Well, these works are such large-scale works, ideally they would be in institutions. So other than that, as far as, I believe works, once you send them out there, they've got a life of their own and they have to survive. So, it's great when you walk into somebody's house and you see an old work and it's like, visiting an old friend. But apart from that, I don't...
Can I ask you a question? You've got, the work you took to Venice, Niwa, is now at the National Gallery of Canada. So, and I thought it was a great work for them to have. It was first shown in Sakahan, which was this global contemporary Indigenous project, and it hadn't been bought here. And so, can you talk about that being in that collection and how you feel about that?
Well, the work was in Venice, and then Candice Hopkins, Indigenous curator at the National Gallery, saw it there. So then it went to Sakahan, and it was great to see the work in that context, Indigenous works by a lot of people that I'd really admired for a long time. So because of that, I was just really happy to see it there. Although the response from my people was interesting. It was like, they're our stories, what are you doing? They shouldn't be there. Because now they have to go all that way. But the reality of making art had been sitting in my warehouse for 7 years. And so, that's the other side of it. A lot of artists end up destroying their works because they just don't have room. So, and then I'm thrilled that it's there because, it's about... those global connections, but it's about cultural submersion, or submersion underwater as a metaphor for cultural loss. So it's relevant to Canada and Australia, but so everywhere that work toured, people would talk about the damming hydroelectric power schemes that had flooded their valleys and so on. And places in North America, it was always indigenous land or reserves that was taken first. So, you know, so sometimes those works, it's great to see them overseas in a different context. They don't have to be here. 2 weeks ago, I was in New Zealand House and in London, and one of the joys was going in there and seeing that massive pauihi of iniatuiatas. So, and then going in there this time and it wasn't there, and I was kind of sad that, in a way, I know the family wanted it back here, but it was sad to go there and not see it there. So sometimes it's great to see wonderful work of ours overseas in that context.
I think now it's our time. Yeah, maybe we'll have, if both of you can talk a little bit, maybe for a few minutes each, about the sort of unseen process. I feel like maybe you've done this already, Megan. You've done it. But Brett, I'll give it over to you.
Those pictures if you want, if you can.
Yeah, your slideshow.
Just projects like this, you know, it's never a sole effort. There are at least 15 people. Oh, that's the opening day and our tribe turning up, which made it meaningful, those connections with Taranaki. We still practice the pai marere. I think the next ones show you...
That's the point.
Yeah, there's Taranaki and the poi at the opening. And then there was a series where they talked about the conflict as a way of healing the community, and I was honoured that they asked me back to talk in that context. Te riri me te raukura. Thank you. And then these are the talks that I was talking about before, where it was an excuse to talk about some of those issues, healing the community. Thank you. Carry on. But yeah, just flick through these. But yeah, as I say, there are about 15 people at least that were involved in this, in the making of these things. So over a 2-year period. Yeah, carving, mould making, sewing the tapestry, all of those things. The one I had the most to do was this, but was the wagon itself. So, yeah. So these are long processes, and actually lockdown helped a lot, because the show was supposed to be a year beforehand, and lockdown enabled me to finish things as I intended them to be. So.
She worked with, she had, I think, she only had 4 people that she worked with. 2 fabricators, Martin Kelly and Chris, can't remember his other name, that's not nice. Chris and my son worked with her as an assistant, studio assistant, helped make her work. Got told off every day, I think, which was quite good for him. You know, with Shona, no, doing it this way. No, you can't use the graphite that way, you use it this way. But yeah, great education for him to be in and around an artist like that. I mean, she's always been like his grandmother, even though she's not his grandmother, but she's always been there for him since a baby, so I think it was a great opportunity. But yeah, she worked with fabricators to help her make the work out those rocks that are made out of wire. Originally she wanted pumice, to talk about volcanic rocks, but of course pumice isn't that large, because they're large. So she made some out of wire instead. So woven stainless steel, but had to work out how they could be. I mean, because she likes the challenge, the technical, how do you make those rocks stay and not collapse in on themselves? So she works all of that stuff out and then tells you how that all operates, you know, because she's worked it all out almost mathematically. And yeah, so she likes to find the solution she likes the problem so that she can work out the solution, but works with a lot of people, works with engineers, to do all the stuff, to suspend it from the ceiling, all of those kinds of things. Quite industrial processes, really. So, yeah, not solo, but her vision, same as Brett's vision.
I think one of the main sort of interesting connections between these contemporary commissions is the role of the gallery, but also collectors and benefactors. So the gallery be able to, to give exhibition moments to these artists and big opportunities to make new work, but that work is not possible without the support of, for instance, Creative New Zealand, with research residencies program that we have, and then the Govett-Brewster Foundation as well, in terms of the supporting of the production of work, of Shona's work. And also, I suppose, key to note, in difference to perhaps Te Papa, which has a good acquisition budget, is that the Govett-Brewster does not have an acquisition budget. So we rely on benefactors and the Govett-Brewster Foundation to collect works, and that's quite common actually amongst public art galleries as well. And then I suppose the aim is in thinking about, which works do we collect and keep in particular collections to ensure that work is available for future generations. And I suppose, we're at the moment, we are looking to acquire Cease the Tide of Wrongdoing, so Brett's work. If I can, there's Brett. Not the wagon. If we can find it at the front. So we've got a bit of a campaign going to fundraise for this at the moment. The Govett-Brewster Foundation is looking to raise money, and so if you want to join the cause, then please talk to Zara over in the corner about that program, which is here. I suppose, is there any other people you'd like to acknowledge in terms of these works that were made?
Was Shona's, you mean?
Shona's,
Well, Jenny Nelligan, her dealer gallery, Bowen Galleries, who support Shona all the time. So there's always lots of people. There's always lots of people, from art dealers all the way through to the people who actually work hands-on. As I said, it was a great opportunity, even the Swallowing Geography show, to be able to pay artists a decent fee and then to realise new works. As I said, Shona went beyond, which made me laugh, really like a drain when she gave me these proposals, and just thought, how do I help make that happen? And the thing about Te Papa getting money, it's Lottery Board's money, so again, there's a whole process that you go through with that, and it is a privileged kind of position to be in, but take it very seriously to make sure that there's heaps of checks and balances in terms of making work. You're there to kind of work to and for people. That's kind of how I see it. I don't know if there's anyone else I need to acknowledge. Te Rangi, who helped install the first one. He's since passed away, and Shona actually acknowledged him in the show. She said, "Here I give my thanks to Te Rangi, who, which was Cannibal Creations, who were the installers for her project." And I
think also Bruce Quinn and the Pollen Foundation helped with the production of that work. So now open to the floor if you've got any questions.
I've just finished the work for Scape. That was supposed to be finished a couple of weeks ago, but it's so for Scape in Christchurch. So that one, and I'm working on a work for the airport in Hamilton and Waikato at the moment. Yeah, so there's always something happening. Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question too about how Ngāi Tahu responded to your show in Christchurch. Did they come for the opening? People come?
Yeah, there were people from Ngāti Wheke and Tuahuriri. So, we made some of those connections. And actually the following day was November the 5th, and that's when they acknowledged, Pāhua Day.
Anyone?
No. Well, thank you for joining us. We have another talk tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I suppose can we thank our speakers?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Te